Right, so officially, formally welcome everyone to our workshop, Teaching with AI, Concerns and Opportunities. We are so excited to have so many people here with us today. We hope we'll have a really great discussion and chance for some questions, comments, and hopefully share some relevant and helpful resources and materials with you all today. Just very briefly to introduce ourselves, my name is Jane Hammons. I am assistant professor and the Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian in the University Libraries. And I'm very excited to be joined today with a co-presenter. I'll let him introduce himself, and I'll just say really quickly, there's no way that this workshop could have taken place without him, because he is the AI expert in the libraries. So I'm so grateful to him for being willing to participate. So go ahead, Mike, if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Michael Flierl, Associate Professor and Student Learning Librarian, and I'm excited to be speaking with you all today.
Great, thank you. So really quickly, so basically the workshop is divided into two main sections. The first one is going to be talking about concerns related to AI and teaching, and Michael is going to be leading that section. Then we'll have some time for discussion and questions at the end of his section. And then we'll switch over and talk about some opportunities and some maybe teaching activities or resources, thinking about how we can teach with AI, and I'll be taking over on that section. And you'll notice a difference in terms of sort of how we organize our slides and lead our sessions. Hopefully it will still flow together fairly well. Please feel free to add questions to the chat as we go along. So we'll each be monitoring the chat as the other person is presenting. If it's something that we'll feel comfortable answering, we'll try to answer that in the chat, and if not, we'll save that for the Q&A and have that during that section as well. So hopefully we'll have a chance to hear from you. Folks that have been to one of my workshops before know I like to generally try to be fairly interactive, but with such a large group registered today, we knew it might be a little bit challenging to do some of the more interactive stuff. So we do have a couple of polls, and we do have a chance for questions, so that we'll still have a little bit of engagement, but it won't be maybe quite as much as you might be used to if you've been to one of my workshops before. All right, so I think that's everything that we have out of the way that we need. Hello from Central Michigan, wonderful. University in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Yeah, it's great to see folks. We know we have a lot of Ohio State folks here, but we have a lot of folks from other institutions as well. So welcome to everyone. That is great. All right. So we do have a quick opening poll just to kind of get the temperature of the room and how you all are feeling in terms of thinking about teaching with AI. So basically the question is, when you think about teaching with AI, is the strongest concern that you have, strongest feeling that you have concern? Is it excitement, or is it something else? So we're going to do this as a quick Zoom poll. So I will go ahead and launch that Zoom poll and give everyone a chance to answer if you are comfortable. If not, that's okay as well. So I'll go ahead and launch that and let you all have a chance to respond if you would like. If your response is other, you can feel free to add in the chat what that response is. We'd love to see that as well. All right, getting some great participation. Wonderful. So we'll give it just 10 more seconds. It's like almost everyone has had a chance to respond. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and I will share those results with everyone. So you can see that we have a pretty good mix of responses. We have about 43% of you that your strongest feeling is concern. Have about 38% of you that your strongest feeling is excitement, and then we have about 19% of you that have other feelings there as well. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing those results. We take a look at some of the other feelings that folks are having, both mixed feelings with a side of underwhelm, excitement, concern, exhaustion, speculation. Yeah, concern about how AI is misusing us. Wow, that is a great response. Same, both, a lot of folks with both, a little of both. Yeah. So we've got some concerns, we've got some excitement, we've got some folks in the middle. So hopefully we'll be able to address both of those aspects in our workshop today. So thank you so much for sharing your responses. And we'll go ahead and hand it over to Michael to talk about some concerns.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to be the bad cop today. So I'm going to go over the concerns piece, but I think it's important to note that if anyone's familiar with the concept of dual use or the problem of dual use, that's kind of what this question gets at. And it's fascinating to see roughly equal of concern plus and excitement. And that's, I think, about right, honestly, because AI has tremendous capacity for positive outcomes and potential great harms, and we need to weigh both. It's a tool, just like a hammer, just like nuclear energy. It could be used in a variety of ways. One little anecdote about this, I saw recently there's a biotech AI startup that tries to use AI to develop drugs more quickly. An AI safety conference asked them, hey, could you tweak your AI systems, your AI tech to drive towards toxicity and make even worse uh, chemical agents or potentially, nerve agents or other things that could harm humans rather than towards safety. And they said it was remarkably simple. They just changed a couple values from like 0 to 1, a couple like toxicity values. And overnight or shortly thereafter, in a matter of hours, they rediscovered some of the most toxic chemicals known to man and even proposed potentially even more toxic and dangerous chemicals. So I think that's a great example of how AI can be used. And I think it's totally healthy and appropriate to see both sides, to feel both excitement over it, but also consternation over the power and the potential downsides. So I'm going to be more on the concern side today, but I think it's important. This is, you have to weigh both aspects to it. So next slide, please. Okay, so I know a couple people asked, like, can we just clarify what we mean here? There's a lot of different terminology being thrown around. This is like a pretty good graphical representation. AI is a very big concept. It's in fact changed. It's pretty dynamic. There's a lot of discussion about what it means and the difference between AI and machine learning, deep learning, et cetera. But AI is just this very broad concept of trying to mimic human intelligence. There's also generative AI. That's the new AI systems out, ChatGPT, Claude 2, Bard, et cetera, et cetera. So those are AI systems that they fit within the deep learning paradigm as large language models, but they generate text as opposed to an AI like a translation app. That's also artificial intelligence often, but that isn't generating its own content. So AI is this big umbrella term. Machine learning, you'll hear that. That just means a probabilistic approach towards getting at mimicking human intelligence. So if you hear machine learning, you need to think probabilistically or statistically. And then there's deep learning. So this is a very basic attempt to mimic the human architecture of the brain. So, or neurons in particular. Certain neurons get excited at different levels of abstraction. So certain neurons get excited when they see like a line versus versus like a letter versus a word. And some scientists won the Nobel Prize for this in the 80s. They started this research in the 50s, 1950s. And basically we've tried to mimic that through computationally. So that's what deep learning is. It's really trying to break down very complex things into very, very small bits. So when you hear deep learning, it just means there's a lot of these there's a lot of layers of, kind of computational neurons, so to speak. So that's a very, very brief generic overview of what we mean by AI here. Okay, so practically speaking, there's a lot of questions from the pre-survey asked, like, can we detect AI writing? There's a big question. I assigned students reflections. I assigned students written work out of the classroom. How can I detect if it's their work or if it's work from AI? And if you're really nervous about this, I have some really bad news for you. As it stands, current generation technology to detect AI written work, it's terrible. You can't trust it. At best, it'll give you a probability. But even then, there's some very basic, easy to do ways to manipulate that, to manipulate these AI detection tools. So practically speaking, if you're an instructor right now and you have this concern, I would very strongly advise you against relying on any type of AI detection tool whatsoever. Best case scenario, you might get a percentage likelihood. Maybe it might flag something for you to investigate. But as I'll show you later, there's even issues with humans detecting AI writing, excuse me. So basically the way to do this would be a paraphrasing attack. So you ask one AI to paraphrase the output of a different AI. You can even have it translate English to Polish, Polish to Russian, Russian back to English, go through a English paraphrasing tool, and it's basically trivial to fool an AI detection software. So you really can't rely on it empirically from the current generation of AI detection software. And then what's interesting too is that if you think you can detect it, if you think you have an eye, current research shows across expertise, age, and a number of other variables, humans typically can't, especially if you're clever with your prompting for it. You can, so for instance, 9 months ago, I would say generative AI technology like ChatGPT that tended to write in like a very even sentences. The sentence length didn't change. And that was one of a few heuristics you can use to kind of guess, or, if there would be a red flag if it was AI generated. But with some very simple prompting, you can get around that such that it sounds more and more human. And to be frank, I think we all need to be humble about our ability to detect AI written content. The current research out there, which again isn't exhaustive or really, it's not exhaustive, I would say, but as it stands, research indicates that humans are a poor judge of that. Okay, so another interesting thing is that it's very easy to jailbreak ChatGPT, and that's another, or other generative AI. And by jailbreak, I mean output harmful content to get it to manipulate to say kind of whatever you want to get outside of the guardrails. This is just a recent paper about how you can even automate it. There's these really weird strings or strings of letters and characters you can addend to the beginning or end of your input. And you can basically get it to, describe how to make a bomb, just, remove a watermark for you, how to fish, like do a phishing attack, that type of thing. So and my guess would be you would be able to manipulate it to imitate certain things or copy certain things really effectively. So you can get it to, it's relatively trivial to jailbreak a lot of these generative AI tech. To do what you want, and who knows what students or you could create in order to do that. So that's another thing to take into account if you're having it in your classroom. So OSU does have a statement about this. You can have AI in the classrooms, but it needs to be instructor driven. And I think this is the right approach. In what Jane linked to and what's in our folder here is a Department of Education report. And the biggest takeaway I have from it, it's excellently written. I highly recommend everyone read it. Is that there needs to be a human in the loop. And that's really, if you genuinely have concerns about AI, you as the instructor need to be at the center of AI use in some way, shape, or form. So you need to give explicit permission to students, what to do, how to do it, and Jane's going to get more details about how to accomplish this later. Now it's interesting too. You also have to kind of learn a little bit about generative AI if you're going to use it in the classroom, I would say. So there's different types of prompting techniques. This is what's so-called prompt engineering, and one that's really interesting is called chain of thought prompting. And there's some evidence, like this research, showing that the accuracy of ChatGPT, for instance, will go up if you ask it to describe its steps. So you ask it to break down its reasoning, quote unquote, for answering a specific type of question, and that drives it to be a little bit more accurate. So you don't say, give me the answer for this complex math question. You say, give me the answer for this complex math question, but break it down step by step in at least 5 steps that I can understand it. That tends to make the response more accurate, which could be a good thing for a variety of reasons. But Jane, if you can go to the next slide. Unfortunately, sometimes this isn't always faithful. If you bias the model one way or the other, it will come up with unfaithful reasonings to justify that answer. So it's really important to know that a lot of this generative AI technology, that's the most pressing and important and impressive thing out there right now, it doesn't understand the world. It doesn't care about truth or truth values. It doesn't understand that what it's saying is corresponding to something in the real world. It is simply trying to predict text, much like your cell phone, your texting app. It tries to predict your next word. Generative AI will just try to predict the 994th word, and to answer your query or to answer your input. So even when it there's this aura of objectivity to technology in this sense, but there's some really interesting experiments going on demonstrating how it could even be misleading in describing its quote unquote thought process. So it's actually important, I think, to use quotes, because it's not really thinking, it's not reasoning in a way that in which we would describe it, a human's reasoning. There's also, pardon the language, there's also just some creepy stuff going on with AI and things that are really intrusive. So I don't know if anyone's heard of WorldCoin, but the founder of ChatGPT has co-founded this cryptocurrency startup, and they've put these silver orbs all around the world, and you're supposed to scan your retina with the alleged goal of making sure that you're a human online at some point. It's actually quite vague, but functionally what has happened is that you get this type of cryptocurrency, which on current markets is equal to about 50 to 60 US dollars. And so a lot of the world's poorest people are scanning their retinas just to get 50, 60 US dollars. That's, in my book, that's exploitative. And I think it's indicative of the type of use AI, what do I want to say? AI companies, let's say. There's great potential to be extremely intrusive and exploitative of a variety of peoples around the world, and you kind of have to keep an eye out for it. I mean, Sam Altman has testified before Congress. He's got a lot of these accolades, but also you can't ignore him trying to do something like this. And I think there's a number of different problems with that. So another aspect is accuracy. I noted this before. At best, current gen AI technology, ChatGPT 4, at best on certain subjects is accurate 80% of the time. Now that's improved over time, at least according to ChatGPT. We'll debate this in a second. But that's also important to keep in mind. Are students aware that they have a 20% chance of ChatGPT describing something totally wrong? Do they have the expertise to recognize that what it's outputting is wrong? An AI engineer I've worked with previously asked him, is ChatGPT, is it evolutionary, revolutionary, or useless? He said all of the above. It's useless outside of an expert, because the expert knows when what it's saying is accurate, when it's saying is not accurate. So I'm running out of time. I'm gonna speed up a little bit. This is a fascinating new phenomenon called drift. I'm gonna direct your attention to the top left quadrant. Ask a simple question about, is this number a prime number? In March 2023, ChatGPT got this right, almost 98% of the time. As of this past June, it got it right 2.4% of the time. And it's unclear why. At the same time, ChatGPT 3.5, which is a less sophisticated model, drastically improved the accuracy of this. This is called drift. So even if it's only accurate 80% of the time today, in 3 months' time, we don't know whether or not it'll be accurate. And because of the black box problem, we're not fully understanding the mechanics of this neural network architecture. We generally speaking, computer scientists can't explain why this is happening. Again, another factor for students, I think for instructors to consider. Also, interestingly, these models are becoming multimodal. So I was able to input a CSV file, and it output this graphs. They could do graphs, they could do charts. Right now, it's not pretty impressive. In fact, it's There's some issues with how this is displayed. But I think it's indicative of what's going to happen in 6 months, 9 months. You might be able to give it a data set and reliably get create graphs and charts. That asks a great question: is cleaning data useful for your class, or do you think students would be able to do more higher order thinking skills because this gets some of the rote mechanics of creating graphs and charts done? That's a big open question. So I'll kind of almost conclude on this note. I think there's a lot of hype around this technology, and it's important to realize, like, it's still nascent. There's still a lot of businesses trying to use it, but it's currently not been super effective. So an analogy I've heard that I like is generative AI technology currently is like a new computer, but we don't have a word processor or an Internet Explorer, a web browser to use it. So we have this powerful tool, but we're not quite sure how to use it to its full potential yet. And even in the early internet, it took, a decade for music to get sorted out or YouTube to pop up. So it might take longer than what you might think. But at the same time, there's no pedagogical silver bullet, as Jane's going to get into. I think it's healthy to have some skepticism, to embrace some of this, but not to be worried that you have to radically change your pedagogy. So my last point here, just a few points. You can't trust generative AI technology. I think it's important to communicate that to students. Also, equally, we computer scientists don't fully understand the technology, and that's for a variety of technical reasons I won't get into today. But if you want to investigate that further, you can look at the black box problem or AI safety. That's a great Wikipedia page to read before bed, I promise. I would suggest it's likely AI is here to stay, and there's likely going to get more, and there's probably going to be a lot more of smaller AIs around that you can use, rather than like a big, super intelligent singular AI. And that's something to keep on the lookout for. And then lastly, no one knows what the heck's going to happen in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. That's just a guess for me. Who knows? This could all flame out, to be frank. There are computer scientists arguing that the way that these generative AI are structured, it's not going to get any better. We could go into that later. There's a whole concept of AIs creating data to train other AIs. That's called synthetic data, because they've scraped the entire internet and there's no other data to train it on. It's just, the future is genuinely uncertain. And I think you and students, instructors, educators, administrators, I think it's useful to have some humility in that sense too. So, okay, I'm at time, and I think I'm going to end there.
All right, thank you, Michael. So a couple of questions. So the first one that is really easy is Ellen asked if the slides are going to be shared, and yes, they will. So everyone will get a follow-up email with everything. And then we had a great question earlier from Brett, who asked, is it possible to use AI to detect stylistic differences from a suspected AI writing versus an in-person writing example? So I think that means, like, if you already have an example of the students writing, and then is there a way that you can use AI to detect if something they turn in later is AI generated? Yeah,
I think that's actually a fascinating question. I genuinely don't know. My suspicion, though, is that, my suspicion is that there wouldn't be enough. Like, you can get popular people who've written a lot, like New York Times columnists, for instance. You can write in their style because there's enough data to train it on. With a very small sample size, even of like on the order of dozens of pages, even 100 or 2, that might not be enough. Another aspect you need to consider is that anything you input into, say, Claude 2 or Bard or ChatGPT, they're using that data to train. And so I think it's a fair concern. Are you giving up student information without without their permission? That's another angle to it. So I guess functionally, I don't think so. I think that's unlikely.
Thank you. So a couple comments came in. So Mark shared interpretability or explainable AI is another good keyword if you're interested in the black box problem. So I don't know if, Mike, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, that's an emerging research area. DARPA, the R&D arm of the DoD, kind of started that up in the early 2000s, I think. And there's advocacy. I would advocate that we need new types of AI that are explainable and human interpretable. Without that, we won't be able to fully trust the output of an AI, especially even with these chain of thought prompting. You think you can get around some of this. Well, if it's unfaithful, then what's the point? But I would recommend there's some great explainable AI articles out there to read up on that. And two, I would argue that we collectively need to advocate at a policy level, at a higher level, for different types of AI systems. And I think we can do that for the sake of education.
So we had another comment came in. Kate shared, many companies are adding ChatGPT to their corporate learning systems as an FYI. Therefore, students need to learn how to use AI. And then, oh, go ahead, Michael, if you had a comment.
Big open question. I know some instructors, I had a debate with a colleague. I thought ChatGPT is useful for brainstorming. I've used it personally. I had another colleague that said, I wouldn't want a student to use it for brainstorming a paper. It's something gets lost in the critical thinking of brainstorming. I said I wouldn't distinguish between talking with it and a friend. They disagreed. I think there's a lot of open debate right now about that, and to the extent of what is lost and what is the cost versus the benefit of using it. So I think that's a big open-ended question right now. But I agree. I don't think you could ignore it.
And then we had a question from Corey. Let's see, sorry, scrolled really quickly. Is there protection of student work submitted through applications like turnitin.com so that is not fed into AI apps?
It depends. You'll have to check out their terms of service. I do know the College Board recently just got caught selling student data who took the SATs, ACTs, and they sold private data to like Facebook and TikTok. So I don't know. You'd have to check their terms and services. It's also something I think that's worth educating students on. Where is your data? Who's using it? And why is Google and Facebook and TikTok free?
And then Mark asks, let's see, will there be apps to detect if something was AI generated?
Yeah, there's currently a big movement for watermarking, in particular of images. But again, there's been successful spoofing attacks to mimic that watermarking. And currently it's kind of voluntary. I think companies are only doing so because they're self-interested. It'll be kind of a cat and mouse game, but currently for text generation, at least, they are simply not, there's nothing there that is anywhere near as accurate for any basic type of paraphrasing attack.
And then Henry asks, is AI something that a person can realistically build or test on one's own, like download a version, run it offline, rather than interacting with one of the large corporate models?
Yes, absolutely, you can. There's a kind of a GitHub for AI. It's called Hugging Face. I would recommend checking it out. Meta, the parent company of Facebook, just released their own, a couple different versions of different sizes of their own openly available AI called Llama. So you can download that. You have to use some Python. You have to have some technical know-how, but you can download it locally and run it on your own computer, which is kind of interesting. And I would suggest people to do that, to play around with it. There are some open questions about the safety of releasing such a powerful tool. For instance, state actors could use it to drive down the cost of spewing misinformation. So that is it's a somewhat controversial choice, I have to admit. But you totally can do that. And I think it's a worthwhile project for instructors and students alike.
Great. So I think that was all the questions that we had for now for Michael. If you do have other questions as things come up, continue to go ahead and add those into the chat. And then we will move on to the second half of the workshop and thinking about teaching with AI opportunities and resources. So what I'm going to do is just to share some ideas for, ways that you can think about approaching teaching with AI, some sort of sample activities. And, just thinking about this as, here's something that we can use to engage our students in various ways. So that's really what the focus is going to be on this section. So the first thing that I want to mention is that AI does give us as instructors an opportunity to really think about our goals and our outcomes for the assignments that we have. And I know that may not seem always like a fun opportunity for someone, but I think it is really worthwhile for all of us to always take that time to think again about, why am I giving this assignment? What am I hoping students do get out of that? So that will help us to think a little bit more about whether or not it might be appropriate to incorporate AI, depending on the assignment, or if we think it's something that really we shouldn't incorporate AI. But having that time to really think again about our assignments, our activities, what we're doing with students, what we really want them to learn, in light of this technology, I think can be helpful for the course as a whole. And one of the things that we might want to think about, if there is, a really big concern about, students using AI to generate their final paper or something like that, this is something where we can really think about how we can shift the emphasis on what we're grading, what we're, emphasizing with students from the, away from the final product, having that big final product at the end, and more toward the learning process. So having smaller scaffolded pieces throughout the semester, rather than having that significant weight on that one final product that they have at the end. So that, we're getting what students are learning as they're going along, and we're not just emphasizing, the end outcome. And as Michael mentioned, I think it's really important to be transparent with students about our expectations. And so this gives us a chance to really have a talk with students and to, think for ourselves, what are our expectations? And then, clarify and communicate those expectations to students. And I can mention, I've been on a group that's developing this academic integrity module for COAM that it doesn't focus specifically on AI, although that is a part of it. And the feedback that we've gotten from students is that they are confused. They are uncertain. They're concerned about this as well. So that does create an opportunity for some really good, engaging talks with students. And so that's what I really was leaning into next, right? Is that, this is a chance for us to open up and have small group discussions, small group debates around the appropriate use of AI within the class, so that we can get set clear expectations for our own classroom. But in our fields, having a talk with students about what is the appropriate use of AI within our particular field. I just did some quick searching and I found, all kinds of articles, ways to use AI in your vet practice, ways to use AI in social work, ways to, the chat GPT lawyer, right? So, having students talk about the implications, the ethical implications of using these technologies as, future professionals in the field. What are the ways that they're going to be engaging with these technologies? What are the ways that they think it's not appropriate? So there, I think there's a chance to have some really great and interesting discussions with students around AI in the classroom and AI in the field. And so this is just one example I wanted to share. So this is from socialworkers.org. Where they put together this article, here are a few ways that a social worker might use ChatGPT. And you could have students go through and talk about each of these examples. And I can see, writing thank you letters to fundraising initiatives. Students might not have any ethical concerns about using AI in that way. But when you get to the point of, refining treatment goals, creating discharge plans, are there, what are the concerns about using AI at that level? I think, again, so you could share a few examples like this of here's some of the ways that you might be able to use AI in the field, and have students have those discussions. And of course, my chat has to jump in and join. So hold on 1 second while we get back to the right slide. What did he do? I cannot believe he did this. So I have no idea where I'm at here. Okay, hopefully we are now back on the right slides. Sorry about that. Lucky he is going to be in trouble this afternoon for that. Okay. So So specifically, of course, we know, as we've already mentioned, that there are a lot of concerns about academic integrity, academic misconduct around the use of AI. And this is a great time to have a discussion in your class about AI in terms of about academic integrity, in terms of AI technologies. But I think that can also lead to a broader discussion about academic integrity and academic misconduct. What does it mean to think about what academic integrity is, what academic misconduct is, and then how does AI use fit into that? So you could, for example, have the students read the descriptions of academic integrity and academic misconduct or plagiarism at your institution, and then have them generate lists of examples of what are the ways that within these definitions that you could use AI that would align with academic integrity. What are examples of the ways that you could use AI that would represent academic misconduct? So bringing the students into that conversation, rather than just coming in and say, use it, don't use it, really talking through the implications, because, the implications are not really all that clear. It's something that we're still struggling to figure out ourselves exactly what the line is in terms of, using AI as part of the research process, as part of the writing process. When does it tip over into being academic misconduct? That's not always exactly clear. So it's a great chance, a great opportunity to have those kinds of conversations with your students. You'll get great feedback from them, and you'll be able to clarify, based on what they talk about, your own expectations, your own guidelines for academic integrity and AI. So one example that I wanted to share. So as part of that module that I mentioned that is being developed for COAM, that's the Committee on Academic Misconduct for non-Ohio State folks. One of the things we did is we included scenarios around different types of use. And this is something that we created in Canvas, our course learning management system. So we have an example here where a student is using AI to brainstorm some potential topics for a presentation. They've gotten the guidance that your presentation should be something related to the 1960s in American history, but there's so many things out there the student doesn't know what to choose. So they ask ChatGPT to recommend a few topics. And then they go from there and use that to find their own sources and go ahead and create their presentation. So in a case like this, is this plagiarism? Is this academic misconduct? I don't think so. I would say no. But it gives them a chance to, think through those kinds of different scenarios. So you could, write up a few different scenarios. You could ask ChatGPT to write up a few scenarios that would help you think about this topic, and then, have them discuss those in the classroom with students. So we thought this would be an interesting time to have a quick poll and see what folks think, thinking about this issue of how our definitions of academic misconduct and academic integrity and plagiarism, how they're keeping up with AI technology. So I have a quick poll here. So Ohio State defines plagiarism as the representation of another's work or ideas as one's own. It includes the unacknowledged word-for-word use or paraphrasing of another person's work and the inappropriate unacknowledged use of another person's ideas. So we're going to do a quick poll, and based on that definition, do you consider the use of an AI technology to write a paper plagiarism? So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll, and hopefully everyone is seeing that. And we'll let folks share their responses there. So we'll give it about 10 more seconds. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. And I'm going to share the results. So as you can see here, we have about 75% of the folks who say that that is plagiarism. We have about 25% who say that it is not. So for anyone who answered no, would love to hear your thoughts on why you think that using AI in that situation would not be considered plagiarism. So we've got some comments here in the chat. So Kimberly, for example, shares, yes, but I'm not sure students would interpret it that way. And AI is not a person, but it includes people's work. Let's see. Person will need to be replaced with entity, Emily said. Preston shared no, unless AI is unacknowledged. Kate also shared not if the student acknowledges or cites their use of AI. Pasha shared, if you remove the two uses of person, I would vote yes. So yeah, so you can see in those comments that folks that are giving, and someone mentioned like AI is not a person. I saw that comment go through, right? So the definition that we have at Ohio State now says a use of another person's work. And it is very interesting. And I think that we already are seeing and hearing of examples of students saying, AI is not a person. I am not violating, academic integrity laws because I am not using another person's work, right? So that, it's a really interesting way to think about it. Do we need to think about how we are going to revise our definitions or our understanding of what academic integrity is or what plagiarism is? A lot of definitions of plagiarism that you will see, it's not specifically mentioned in here, but a lot of definitions talk about plagiarism as theft, right? Theft of another person's intellectual property. Is that the case if you're using AI? It doesn't matter how much of AI that you use, right? Doesn't matter, if you cite that you have used AI or not. So there's a lot, I think there's a lot of gray area still there in terms of what would or would not be considered plagiarism or academic integrity in terms of using AI tools. It's just not clear, I don't think, to students. I don't think it's always clear to ourselves as well. Right. And so I will mention that according to COAM, yes, an unacknowledged use of AI is definitely academic misconduct. So I wanted to make sure that I'm clarifying that for the Ohio State folks, that they would definitely consider that to be academic misconduct. But I do think, it must be acknowledged that you can see why a student would look at this definition and say using AI is not wrong. So I just wanted to make that mention there. So, I've already mentioned that I think that AI represents a great opportunity to have really engaging discussions with students, but I think that you can take it further than that and have students do a lot of really cool activities thinking about the use of AI. So maybe you have students work together to develop the guidelines for how AI should be used in your course. Maybe you have students brainstorm ideas or activities that could demonstrate their learning that help them to avoid, those concerns about AI. I love the idea of taking a campus policy or like taking that definition of plagiarism, having students work together to collaborate. How would you revise this to incorporate AI? What should the new definitions of plagiarism look like? What should new definitions of academic integrity look like in light of these tools? So really having students be active and engaging and thinking about going forward, how they would incorporate and use these tools. Same thing in terms of professional. Have students look at ethical guidelines in their field. And how would you rewrite these? How would you revise these based on the new technologies that are being developed? So really great ways to get students thinking about and active, using their critical thinking, maybe going out and doing some research and coming up with proposals, coming up with recommendations, guidelines for how to incorporate and use these tools in their field. I also think AI tools are a great opportunity for students to practice critical reading and peer review. We know that when we try to get students to do peer review, sometimes they can be reluctant to criticize their fellow students. So this is something where you could ask an AI tool to create multiple versions of, reading or assignment of writing, and have students practice their critical, skills, critical analysis skills on that, where they're, giving feedback about what it did well, what it did not, how could it be improved, and knowing that they're not, actually criticizing another person when they do that. So a great chance for them to practice those skills of critique, critical reading, peer review, having students in an art class. We know that AI tools can detect art, can create art. So have students act as critics and write reviews of AI generated art that demonstrates their understanding of key concepts discussed in the class. So lots of opportunities of ways that you can incorporate AI to let students practice some of those skills that you want them to learn without feeling like that they are actually, criticizing a real person to do that. Critical analysis and questioning. So one of the things that you could do, for example, is say students have to do a research project and you want them to develop the entire project. Like they have to identify the population, they have to identify the research method, they have to identify the statistical analysis that they're going to use. You could have an AI tool generate that research plan first and have students evaluate whether or not that's the appropriate plan, right? Is the research method that was recommended by the AI tool appropriate for answering the question? Are the statistical tests that they recommend appropriate for answering the question? So, having that tool generate that plan so that students can question that, think about that, and then plan their own research process. Asking good questions, we know, is something that is really hard for students sometimes to do, and they can practice asking questions, using an AI tool. They ask one question, they get a response, they ask additional questions, they get another response, they ask additional questions, and they can get an idea thinking about, closed-ended questions versus open-ended questions, what kinds of responses that they get as those are coming through. So a good way, I think, the students, again, to practice a lot of the skills that we want them to develop. Citation tracing, citation evaluation. We know that AI tools can generate lists of citations that are completely fabricated or that are partly fabricated. So we can have students practice their skills in tracking down citations. So they can, give them a list of AI generated citations, have them determine if those are real citations or not. Do the journals exist? Do the authors exist? So that they can practice their search skills. And then, they would have a chance to determine, okay, if it is a real article, is it actually relevant to this topic or this research question? Having AI tools, for the librarians in the group especially, we talk a lot about lateral reading as a skill. So learning how to evaluate information that we find online, not by staying on a particular site, but by going and searching across multiple sites. So we could have the AI tool generate a list of claims. So for example, claims in support that, drinking raw milk is healthy. And here are the claims. Have students track down those claims. So not just the sources, but actually to evaluate the claims themselves, finding multiple sites to determine whether or not they consider that claim to be accurate, right, or appropriate. So lots of opportunities and ways that I think that we can incorporate AI tools in our classes to help students think about, practice the kinds of skills that we want them to develop. And, peer review, critical analysis, searching, source evaluation, all of those are great areas, I think, where AI tools could be helpful. So I know we had a lot of comments that have come in the chat. We do have a time for question in a second, but we wanted to hear one more poll really quickly from folks. Now that you've had a chance to sort of hear both the concerns and the opportunities, how you feel about AI in the classroom now. So if you think that AI in the classroom will improve student learning. So we'll do one more poll real quick, and then we'll get to any final questions or comments that folks have. So we'll go ahead and launch that poll really quickly, or not. It will not let me. All right, so for some reason, it is not actually allowing me to launch the poll. There we go. All right, hopefully folks are seeing that now. All right, so 10 more seconds. go ahead and share those results. So we see we have about 46% of folks who say yes, but we have a good number of folks who are still not sure or still not convinced at all about using AI in the classroom, which is totally okay. As Michael said, this is something that we need to be skeptical and concerned about. So it's perfectly fine, I think, if folks still have those concerns. We did not expect at all that everyone was going to leave the workshop today and totally be, pro AI all the way and absolutely, going forward with it. So we'll stop sharing, close that poll. All right. So we have a few minutes left. Michael, were there any questions?
There's one in particular I'd like you to take a stab at. Soledad asks, and I provided some thoughts on syllabi, but she asks, is there a set of example questions that could be shared with us so we can start having these conversations with the students?
That is a really great question. I don't know specifically of any list that exists. That is something that I would definitely be interested in thinking about developing. So I mentioned we do have a couple of examples of questions in this model that we've been developing. So as a start, I can definitely at least share the examples that we've come up with folks. And this could be potentially something that we're going to ask in a second if folks are interested in follow-up discussion. That perhaps folks that are interested in developing something like that, that we could potentially get a group of us who are interested and work together to start putting together a resource like that might be helpful. Other questions that might be helpful? We had a great response I see from Laurie. I don't think it will improve learning, just like using a calculator doesn't teach a student why 2 + 2 is 4. However, it can be a useful tool to improve productivity.
I'm seeing some difference in the chat. Like we can't penalize people. We can't penalize students as a tool versus how are they going to learn without it versus it's just like a calculator and we're still teaching math. So I still think that's evidence that there's a lot of different perspectives on it, which only solidifies further the need. If we're having disagreements or different opinions or perspectives on it, it's likely our students are going to as well.
Interesting comment from Sherry here. So I would say that you can't cite AI because you can't trace its sources. There's no bibliography, so I can't judge its accuracy. The opposite of the idea of academic knowledge production. That's a really interesting comment, Sherry. I will say, there's been, discussion about citing AI, and there have been some folks that have attempted to develop like citation guidelines for how you can cite AI. But I think that's still a really murky area. But I think that's a really good point about whether or not we can say we can even cite AI at all. Right, so we've already had several students flummoxed by a list of faux citations. Michael, should I see journal reviewers suggest articles that don't exist? Yeah, that's another interesting discussion in terms of AI as part of the journal publication and review process, but that's a little outside of the scope of what we're talking about today. So Liz shared, we should also consider how we as educators are using AI, like Turnitin, auto grading, thinking about why we use these kind of tools and how they improve our teaching, even from a productivity standpoint, as well as how it impacts students, might be a great exercise in empathy. Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, Jua shared, in my class, I give students to write a short essay and ask them to get a revision support using ChatGPT. Then I ask them to write their rationale, why they would accept, reject, or adapt the changes made by ChatGPT.
And I know we're like basically out of time, but I think this is evidence that this is a moving target. This is still emerging pedagogical practice. I don't think there's a silver bullet across disciplines or departments. and that we're all collectively going to have to figure out how to do this in our own classrooms. And this is emerging. I think we have to give ourselves and each other grace. You're likely going to trip up or make a mistake if you are experimenting in good faith with it. But I think it's still an emerging phenomenon that still has a lot of time to mature, to settle on best practices.
So maybe one last question from Henry. Henry asks, having studied it, where might you all rank AI in terms of its likely impact for good or ill, just in terms of magnitude? Similar to the internet or more like the word processor? Michael, I will let you take that one if you feel
I've seen it equate computer scientists, I mean, famous leading computer scientists say it's equivalent to fire, it's equivalent to landing on the moon, it's equivalent to a lot of things. I still think the impact is TBD. Again, it's plausible this flames out. It's not entirely clear exactly how this transforms society because of some of the inherent issues like hallucination, like the inaccuracy, like the unfaithful chain of thought prompting, like jailbreaking. It's really, I would argue, it's unclear.
Yeah. And I'll just add, as a librarian, the first kind of similar, not exactly the same, but similar answer that came up was the use of Wikipedia as part of research process, right? When Wikipedia first began to come up, it was like, no, we're going to ban, no one can use this. And I think a lot of librarians have moved away from that. And like, yes, this can be incorporated as part of the research process, right? There's problems with it, absolutely. But, ignoring it is, doesn't make any sense. And it can be a really helpful tool, depending on how you're using it. So that was sort of the first comparison that came to my mind. So our last question, as we're wrapping up, is if you are interested in having a follow-up discussion, please let us know. And yeah, so a few folks look like that they are interested. So that's great. We'll send out, a follow-up email and try to think about how we can schedule an additional session that allows for more time for questions and discussions for everyone. So again, thank you all so much for being here today. This was a great discussion. It was great to hear all of your questions and comments. So thank you all again for being here. And we hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.